The bodies were hidden inside barrels in an abandoned basement. One of the strangest and most heinous crimes in Australia, and perhaps in the entire history of crime, it sparked terror and panic in the souls of everyone who was informed of its details, not only because of the amount of horror in the facts of the crime itself, but because it proved that sadistic and criminal tendencies can easily be found. It makes its way into the souls of many people whom we consider normal and far removed from a life of crime and violence. In this story, we are not talking about an ordinary serial killer, but rather about a group of friends, neighbors, and relatives who formed an absurd criminal group that enjoys torturing people, killing them, and even devouring them. Imagine, dear viewer, that you live in a quiet street and discover later that your neighbors, friends, and their wives are in fact a group of murderers and thugs, and that is despite the fact that you have known them for years and have seen nothing but goodness and good manners from them. The dangerous discovery. In 1999, while investigating the disappearance of a woman named Elizabeth Hayden, police found 8 barrels containing 11 acid-soaked bodies hidden in the basement of an abandoned bank in Snowtown, Australia. This discovery was the lead that led investigators to the killers, who lived 87 miles south in the city of Adelaide, John Buntage. John Buntage, the leader of the group, he was 33 years old when the bodies were discovered, and he is the main driver of evil and controls the minds of the group. He was sexually assaulted in his childhood by the older brother of one of his friends, and this assault generated in him a complex centered on his hatred for homosexuals and child molesters, and he decided to direct all the hate energy within him towards the surrounding community by hunting and killing anyone who suspected him of being gay or a child molester. He greatly enjoyed torture, killing, and dismembering corpses, especially since he was accustomed to dealing with corpses and body parts because he had worked for a period in a butcher shop as well as in a crematorium. The most important criminal trait of Buntage was his coolness. He was not afraid of anything. The most wonderful moments of his life were when he would open the barrels of corpses and smell the smell of decomposition and watch the decomposing bodies and turn them over. The most beautiful sight in his life was the sight of a dismembered or decomposing corpse. The other great advantage he had was his amazing ability to controlling the minds of others, attracting them to him and making them adopt his ideas. All those who knew him said that he was a kind and gentle person, a good listener, and an excellent communicator. One session with him made one submit to him involuntarily. Bunting harnessed this quality or ability to attract other people to his terrifying world, full of blood and murder. Robert Wagner, he was a neighbor of Buntage, and he was not devoid of psychological problems, as he suffered from his stepfather's ill treatment and severe beatings in his childhood. Buntage was easily able to attract him into his world in 1991 to be his main accomplice in most of his crimes. Jimmy Vlasics. James, Jimmy, Vlasics, his mother was a close friend of Buntage. He lived with his mother and his half-brother in Buntage's house, and because he missed his father, Buntage became like a father to him and began to follow and imitate him in everything. He was exposed to sexual assault at the hands of his brother as a teenager. The half-brother had a great influence on himself to adopt Buntage's ideas and join him in his crimes. Mark Hayden, he lived on the same street and was quickly attracted to Buntage and became an active member of the criminal group. Of course, there were other people who helped in the crimes and participated in some of them, and some of them later became victims of the group and were killed. Like Barry Lane, who was Wagner's best friend, was gay, dressed like a woman, and called himself Vanessa. Likewise, Thomas Travelline also participated in some crimes, but later turned into a victim. In addition to Buntage's friend and Jimmy's mother, she helped in at least one crime, and there is a girl named Judy who also helped collect money from the victims' accounts and blackmail their families. According to the group's confessions, the killings began when they heard in the neighboring suburb a woman quarreling with one of the men and accusing him of harassing one of the boys. Here everyone recalled their bitter memories of sexual harassment, so they headed towards the man and beat him severely, then dragged him to Bating's house, where the assault and beating of him was completed. With sharp tools, they ended up strangling him amid cries of ecstasy and joy. The killings continued, and the strange thing is that, contrary to what serial killers do, which hunt for figures who are far from them and cannot be linked to them. Bondage and his group were choosing victims from their surroundings, acquaintances, friends, and relatives. This matter raised everyone's astonishment during the trial, as how did they commit all these crimes without the police reaching them quickly? Budding and Wagner helped Jimmy kill his half-brother, who had assaulted him as a teenager. Jimmy also lured his brother-in-law, David Johnson, to the group's den, where he was severely tortured and forced to give up his bank account number before they killed him. Later, Bunting felt remorse for David's quick death because he did not enjoy torturing him enough, so he decided to make up for it by tearing David's body apart. He cut off parts of his meat, put them in the frying pan, and then devoured them with his group in an atmosphere of sarcasm and fun. The group did not kill its victims quickly. The victim was usually imprisoned for several days, during which he suffered beatings and torture by electrocuting sensitive parts of the body, pouring chemicals on his body, putting out cigarettes in his face, especially in his nose and ears, and cutting up parts of his body in front of his eyes while he was asleep. Alive, amputated and his fingers crushed. Bontage usually carried out torture while listening to music. The victim was forced to record voice messages to make his family believe that he was still alive and to steal their bank card. Due to the large number of bodies, burial was no longer in the back garden of Bontage's house. So they decided to hide the bodies in acid barrels. Barry Lane, Wagner's close gay friend, was also one of the victims. When he wanted to get away from his friend, Bunting decided that his time was up and he had to be eliminated, so he was lured and various types of torture were inflicted on him, including removing nails, breaking toes, and eventually suffocating him by inserting a piece of cloth into his mouth. As for Thomas Travelline, their partner in their crimes, they decided to kill him in 1998 because he revealed some of their secrets to his cousin, and the rumors reached Padding and Wagner, so they decided to silence him forever before he exposed them, so they lured him to a forest and hanged him there. The police found his body there, but it was considered a case of suicide. Another one of the group's close victims was Elizabeth, the wife of Mark Hayden, a member of the group and Bontage's assistant, and the reason for her murder was that Bontage accused her of looking at him sexually when he visited her husband at his home and that she was an unfaithful woman. So they tortured and killed her in her home when her husband Mark and her children were there. Outside the house. Later, they showed her husband Mark her body lying in one of the barrels, and his reaction was that he laughed at the sight of her and did not get angry at all. In fact, the killing of Elizabeth was the nail in the group's coffin that led the police to catch them. Monitoring her husband and following up on his relationships and friendships eventually led to the search of Bontage's house and the discovery of 2 bodies buried in his backyard. Through investigations, Jimmy Vlasics decided to confess everything to the police in exchange for to obtain a reduced sentence in court. Thus, the police found the barrels hidden in the basement of the abandoned bank. Bunting and the group members were arrested. The 3, especially Bunting, did not show any remorse or sympathy. Bunting said that society owed him thanks because he cleaned the streets of child rapists and homosexuals, even though his victims were not all like that, and he said that if he could go back in time in retrospect, he will commit the same crimes and he does not regret anything. The psychologists who studied Bontage's case and dealt with him said that he is a psychopath, and that ridding society of homosexuals is an excuse he uses to commit murder. He enjoys killing, torture, and the sight of blood and rotting corpses. He himself said during his trial that the most beautiful days of his life were those he spent in the butcher shop, and that he found indescribable pleasure in slaughtering and cutting up animals. The trial of Buntage, Wagner, and Jimmy lasted for a full year in a crime that shook the Australian community. It is considered the longest trial in the history of South Australia. The recordings of the torture were not broadcast because they were so heinous. Buntage's behavior during the trial was noteworthy, as he was almost devoid of emotions and did not show any emotion. He was interested in what was going on around him, and sometimes he would spend time reading books inside the court. Padding was charged with 11 crimes, Wagner with 10, and Jimmy and Hayden with only some. Padding was sentenced to 11 life sentences with no chance of early release. Wagner received 10 life sentences, Hayden received 25 years in prison, and Jimmy received 26 years in prison. The owner of Pating's house demolished it after the group's crimes were exposed and they were arrested. The residents of Snowtown tried to change the name of their town because it was associated with the name of the group even though most of the crimes were committed outside the town, but they failed. In 2011, a film entitled Snowtown Murders was produced, covering the case and the backgrounds of the victims. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell to receive the most important crimes that you may not have heard about before, then click like.